Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. With the next 30 minutes, we'll take you through a compendium of all the business stories that are making the headlines right across Africa. In Cairo, Johannesburg, Lagos and Nairobi, we've got you covered. Here's what's coming up next. Labour unrest in South Africa leaves a bitter taste in the economy as its growth stagnates in the second quarter. Livestock herders in Niger suffer great losses given a prolonged drought in the country. And we'll be talking to a young entrepreneur in Somalia on what it takes to run a laundry business in Mogadishu. Let's start in South Africa. The country's economy has narrowly escaped a recession. Second quarter GDP data were released earlier today. They essentially show that Africa's second largest economy grew by 0.6% in the 3 months to June after recording negative growth in the first quarter. Here's Sumisha Naidu with more.
It was a narrow escape. Official figures show economic growth in South Africa lifted 0.6% in the second quarter. It's hardly anything to celebrate, but many are relieved.
Obviously, that's better than having a negative number, but at 0.6% it really amounts to stagnation. So my view is that our economy is now stagnating, and there are broad areas of this economy that are in recession. So if you look at the data, the manufacturing sector is in recession, the mining industry is in recession, the furniture industry in recession, retail activity had a negative second quarter, the motor industry is in recession. So there are significant components of South Africa that are in recession.
The 0.6% growth recorded came mainly from the financial and business sectors. Transport and government services also helped to lift the economy.
There are two standout features in this number. The one was agriculture, and South Africa is having a good agricultural season. Unfortunately, agriculture is very, very small in the context of South Africa, so not enough to compensate for weakness elsewhere. And then construction growing at 5%.
It was no surprise to see that mining and manufacturing weighed heavily on the growth numbers. Both sectors were hard hit by strike action.
Remember that the two sectors, not only do they account for about 20% of total GDP, but they complement each other. So within manufacturing, you do have basic metals, you have steel, non-ferrous metals that were impacted by lower production in the mining sector.
While many are pleased that some growth has been achieved, many analysts believe the South African economy is still showing all the signs of dipping back into a recession.
Consumers are finding themselves under more and more pressure in terms of the cost of electricity, cost of transport, cost of food, cost of education, and so they've had to scale back activity, and businesses have found themselves worried about policy initiatives from government and worried about infrastructure shortfalls or backlogs, and in particular electricity supply.
This is adding to an already high unemployment rate. Government remains the biggest employer, with several private sector companies announcing job cuts.
We're still above 25% unemployment rate, and we have had many companies, especially in the mining and manufacturing sectors, where we've seen wage increases above CPI. And a lot of companies have said that, look, we're struggling already because of the slow economy, and also we're struggling because wages have gone significantly higher, and we cannot afford to pay our workers that amount.
Small businesses are struggling with rising input costs and weakening consumer demand. As a result, many are being forced to close shop.
Unfortunately, in this country, we haven't really invested much in terms of small businesses, trying to protect small businesses, or at least encourage new entry into the economy. And as a result, the ones that, the small businesses that we do have are struggling.
It's widely expected that economic growth will pick up in the third and fourth quarters of this year as the mining sector ramps up production and manufacturing activity picks up. Full-year growth has been forecast at 1.7% for this year. Sumisha Naidu, CCTV, Johannesburg.
More data for you, this time from the IMF. It has approved a $7.6 million loan for Burundi to assist the landlocked country to strengthen its public finances and address weaknesses in debt management. Now, this latest loan brings total IMF funding released under its 3-year program with Burundi to just over $38 million. Burundi, of course, is one of the 5 poorest countries in the world. It has seen some moderate growth in the last few years amid declining donor support. The IMF projects GDP growth to pick up to about 4.7% this year. However, IMF Deputy Managing Director Naoyuki Shinohara highlighted several future impediments to growth. That includes risks arising from political issues, of course, considering the fact that they have presidential elections in 2015, external vulnerabilities to external shocks given Burundi's narrow export base, and a fairly large influx in refugees. Now, the fallout from the Ebola epidemic does continue to make itself felt in various places right across Africa. In Kenya, for example, some analysts here saying that some sectors may have their output drop by up to 20% as a direct result of reduced travel, business and tourism with West Africa. Here's Peter Okaba with more.
Kenya is an important air traffic hub for the region and East Africa. The Kenyan state carrier Kenya Airways is the largest regional airline and flew 44 times a week to West Africa, comprising nearly a third of the airline's 36 destinations right across the continent. Following the cancellation of flights to Liberia and Sierra Leone, full refunds to passengers and a marked decline in air traffic to the western part of the continent, the airline is expected to be hit hard.
If you look at the airline industry and that if you consider the kind of revenues that Kenya Airways gets as a company and also the revenue that it contributes to the national revenue, will actually dampen because Kenya Airways serves a lot of their flights go to the affected region. So we expect obviously a slump in that sense.
Kenya is rich in travel resources and destinations like the Masai Mara, Amboseli and the Nakuru National Park. Tourism is a key pillar for economic development in the country and also the second largest foreign exchange earner. This being said, the country faces millions of dollars in losses over the Ebola epidemic. Local Tourism Association data indicates that Kenya's current hotel occupancy rate has fallen by about 20% so far.
It has been declared as a high-risk hub. Other tourists and people who connect through the country actually will cancel their flights or choose alternative routes. And so what that means is that the level of travel, people who come to Kenya as well as people who use Nairobi as a connectivity to other regions will actually go down. And so what we would expect is there's going to be a very significant decline in terms of revenues that government gets from either travelers coming in or travelers transiting through the country.
Recently, the Kenya government passed a 630 million Kenya shilling emergency health budget. The budget is mainly to deal with Ebola epidemic prevention work, including inspection and quarantine, establishing an Ebola virus lab, training healthcare professionals, and preparing other emergency precautions.
The impact of Ebola is going to be felt for a long time, especially in terms of socioeconomic aspects, even for perhaps to 5 to 6 years, because of the significant amount of loss of the personnel, the doctors, the health workers, and then the diversion of the health budgets and near standstill of the economies where people have been quarantined not to go to the markets to sell or to buy goods, and restriction of travel. And also it will take time for even tourists and other trade to resume, because the airlines, what will happen is that they won't have passengers who are coming there because of the fear that might still be there.
Kenya's economy is the biggest in East Africa, and with the Ebola epidemic having had a significant impact on the country's tourism and aviation industries, the fallout is expected to touch the entire East African economy. Peter Okaba, CCTV.
Let's revisit our earlier story. Second quarter GDP data from South Africa, of course, indicating that the economy as a whole grew by 0.6%. That, of course, essentially sort of cancels out the contraction that we saw in the first quarter of a similar magnitude. Let's get some analysis on the second quarter GDP numbers now with Suzanne Samuel, an economist with KPMG. She's live in Johannesburg, South Africa. Thank you for your time this evening. Was this data in line generally with expectations?
Thank you. The GDP data that was released today on the second quarter growth figures were not expected by the markets at all. In fact, there was consensus that growth would be sitting at 0.9% quarter on quarter, as opposed to the figures that we saw today of 0.6%. I think the real shock that was delivered was that growth on a year-on-year basis was at 1%, as opposed to the consensus of 1.2% year-on-year. There were a few big surprises, largely in the mining sector, which saw a contraction of 9.4%. Obviously, the increase that we saw in production of coal and iron ore was insufficient to offset the decrease in production of gold ores and other metal ores, such as platinum. There were also unanticipated movements in manufacturing, which contracted to 2.1%.
Indeed. Given, of
there
course,
was also a substantial decrease in wholesale retail and wholesale trade, which was a particular...
Indeed. Cezanne, if I may just jump in there, given the losses that we saw in mining and manufacturing, given the strikes that we saw earlier in the year between AMCU and NUMSA, have we perhaps gotten to a tipping point where companies in either sector must change how they source their labour, what level of automation they use, and of course, at the end of the day, how productive their staff really are with the tools that they have?
Well, I think it's no secret that the South African economy faces significant challenges with the labour strikes. It was something that our finance minister, Nhlanhla Nene, spoke to yesterday. However, I think that it would be incorrect to place the drivers of the labour dynamics and the labour problems solely on the strikes. I think that over the past few months, in particular over the past short term, we've seen a contraction in the demand for commodities on a global level. And at the same time, there have been changes in mining technologies, which has resulted in far more capital-intensive production. And I think when you are talking about labor dynamics such as productivity, capital-intensive ratios, you do need to take those other factors into account. However, I think that unions and business have to adopt a cautious approach, because strikes can be very costly on business and the economy as a whole.
Indeed. Speaking of strike damage, however, let's focus on one particular company here, Lonmin. Its chief executive has denied reports of any downsizing, of course responding to a report from Reuters yesterday. But given the damage done to its balance sheet and its bottom line, is that denial really credible? I mean, at some point, job cuts are inevitable, aren't they?
Well, I think that the denial is not fully credible. I think that earlier in June this year, the company did state that it would need to look at restructuring given the wage negotiations and the protracted nature of the strikes. I think that in the statement they said that they would need to assess how production stabilizes after the negotiations and assess what steps it would need to take in light of possible restructuring. I think that it makes sense for a company like Lonmin to consider restructuring in light of the fact that we know that in 2012 they raised $800 million in capital through their shareholders, and I think their options are limited moving forward. I also believe at the same time that perhaps adopting a conservative approach may be the best option, because I think the last thing a company like Lonmin wants is further industrial actions by unions where workers lay down tools in light of possible layoffs.
Indeed. Finally, Cezanne, wholesale retail sales down about 0.2% quarter on quarter. Just how weak is consumer demand at the household level in South Africa, and what exactly is making it so weak?
I know that the Reserve Bank released data on real consumption expenditure, which showed that 8 out of 9 consecutive quarters have shown moderate growth in consumption expenditure. I think consumers are starting to feel the pressures of price sensitivities in a weaker economic environment. As to what can be causing it, it could be due to higher consumer or production costs. It could be due to decreased income growth. It could also be to a higher debt burden that a lot of consumers are facing at the moment.
Indeed, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you very much for your input tonight. That's Suzanne Samuel from KPMG, live in Johannesburg, South Africa. Now then, a quick run through the equity markets here for you. Let's see exactly what your money has been doing right across the board. Egypt is our focus tonight. Quite a bit of profit taking for the second day in a row. The market, of course, did end a bit lower on the EGX 30. That was down just about half a percentage point or so. However, the broader market was relatively flat, down 0.09 percentage point. Profit taking, of course, with Egyptians being the net sellers on today's trading session. Coming up next, we'll be looking at livestock herders in Niger. They're taking quite a few losses given a prolonged drought in the country. And we'll be focusing on the revamped Kenya National Chamber of Commerce and Industry. What exactly does it have to offer you if you're a Kenyan entrepreneur? All that and more is coming up. Africa is on the move. It's home to 7 of the world's 10 fastest growing economies.
From small businesses to large-scale enterprises, hear directly from entrepreneurs behind the story. It's about putting you in the picture so you know where Africa fits in the global context.
Global Business, weekdays at this time on CCTV Africa.
The rebasing of Nigeria's GDP has been a long time in coming.
The information provides us much more scope to know what the structure of the economy is.
Welcome back. You're watching Global Business Africa. Now then, let's move on to Niger, where pastoralists have been losing thousands of livestock due to drought. Over 10 million individuals in the Sahel, of course, depend on livestock for their livelihood. So this drought, of course, has a massive effect on household incomes and, of course, healthcare as well. Many of these individuals who did have successful livestock trading businesses are now looking for alternative sources of income.
Thousands of livestock have perished in northern Niger following severe drought. Niger's Ministry of Livestock says about 70% of the livestock in Agadez region has been killed. About 80% of the uranium-rich Niger's 16 million people depend on agro-pastoral farming for their livelihood. Many depend on livestock for income to access food, and the drought has dealt a severe blow to many families.
Everyone has been affected by this. I cannot quantify our loss, but this village used to be full of livestock before. Even the camels are dead.
Recurrent shortages in recent years have forced pastoralists to sell livestock, including valuable young females normally kept for breeding, reducing their resistance to food shocks. But with many emaciated animals due to drought, traders are struggling to make sales and are forced to sell their weakened livestock at a fraction of its normal value.
You will find that many people here who used to have hundreds of animals only have a dozen left. Many of them have large families and they are all suffering and are in critical situation, which will further plunge them into poverty.
Analysts say the large loss of livestock may force pastoralists to change their way of life, with some families migrating to find work in towns or cities. The Niger government confirms the situation on the ground is severe and needs more than $34 million to help pastoralists restock their livestock, but only has $603,000.
We conducted a quick evaluation and indeed our findings were quite sad. There are many emaciated animals, many of them cannot even stand. For every herd, some pastoralists could count at least 7 animals that died every morning. So we found many animals when we went to the field.
In 2011, the landlocked desert nation was struck by a famine that afflicted nearly 6 million people, roughly 1/3 of its population, as drought coincided with the return of immigrants from conflict-stricken Libya and Cote d'Ivoire. Noel Makugu, CCTV.
Well then, Kenya, East Africa's biggest economy, is resetting its trading position on the regional and the global scene as well. Of late, the government has been on a fairly aggressive campaign, the idea being to establish trade and investment links across Africa, Europe and the Americas. Now, the World Bank projects the economy in East Africa will grow by about 6 percentage points this year. But that will happen if Kenya's government continues to invest in infrastructure, increase domestic energy output and removes bottlenecks to doing business and sustains fairly sound monetary and fiscal policies. Now, the Kenya National Chamber of Commerce and Industry has just been relaunched and is taking the lead in asserting Kenya's position as the region's biggest economy by pushing for more trade and a lot more investment with her partners across East Africa and the rest of the world as well. Kiprono Kitonyi is the chairman of the National Chamber of Commerce and Industry. He's live with me in studio tonight. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
The Chamber of Commerce and Industry has been moribund for years and years and years. I remember doing stories on its revival when I was a rookie reporter. What caused it to be in that state to begin with?
Basically, the chamber got into the wrong hands. It got into the hands of people who are not private sector players. It got into busybodies who are looking to lead the chamber for all the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
And this really happened in the late 80s into the early 90s, and it went on for about 10 or 15 years. And the root cause of the chamber problems was actually the very weak memorandum and articles of association that allowed for different factions to take control, using very, very low thresholds. And this has been corrected. In 2011, a new set of memorandum and articles was instituted. And we are now working hard to rebuild this very important institution.
In the last decade or so, there have been a lot more aggressive private sector bodies out there, the likes of the Private Sector Alliance, the likes of the Manufacturers Association. For anyone who's watching this, perhaps, the question they'll be asking is, what's your value proposition to me as a Chamber of Commerce?
Okay, one thing, I think let's put this into perspective. I mean, the Chamber is part of a global movement that's 413 years old. It began in 1599 in Marseille in France and, traverses today 177, countries in all 5 continents. So the Chamber is really the de facto business membership organization that brings together the aspirations of the business community across the whole world. So it is really a major international platform for business to engage with business.
There's a lot of heritage behind it.
Yes, there's heritage behind it. And the value proposition, I think I would say, our core functions are fourfold. Is one, we are a business-to-business or networking platform. 2, the International Chamber of Commerce is the leading arbitration body globally. And thirdly, the Chamber is involved in advocacy. So where there are matters that affect the private sector, that affect the business community, things to do with ease of doing business, things to do with trade promotion, the Chamber is involved. And fourthly, the Chamber is a business membership organization. It is one that is there to serve the interests of its membership. So I would say those are the 4 core functions of the Chamber.
All right, let's focus on something that you guys were doing in May, when of course you were in Nigeria with the head of state, and there were a series of bilateral meetings while you were in Nigeria. Yes. One of the things that came out is that the country has a list of banned products, about 30 or so, that affect Kenya's export interests, to quote the National Chamber of Commerce here. Has any progress been made in getting that list reviewed?
A lot of progress has been made. In fact, we did engage again with the Nigerian government in Washington 2 weeks ago during the Africa Leaders Forum. And Kenya has made its entreaty to Nigeria to remove the banned list in order to create a platform for more business to be done between the 2 countries. But I want to say that more than anything else, the glass ceiling has been broken. I mean, there is now conversation between the 2 countries. It's never happened in the history. We have direct flights into Abuja today. We have a large delegation of agricultural investors coming in from Nigeria to Kenya in 2 weeks' time. And some of the companies that had difficulty, Kenyan companies that had difficulty, like Scan Group in Nigeria, the matters are being resolved and they will be soon back in business. Likewise, Nigerian companies that were having challenges doing business in Kenya have also had their issues addressed and they're back in business. So with respect specifically to the banned goods list, that we are confident that when the delegation comes in 2 weeks' time, led by the Minister for Agriculture from Nigeria, they will be giving us feedback. The reason why it's taken a little bit of a long time is because they belong to the ECOWAS trading bloc.
Yeah.
And for them, it's very difficult for them to take a unilateral position. But again, Nigeria is the most vibrant and the largest economy, not just in West Africa, but in the rest of Africa. So they are going through the motions of seeking the collaboration of their partners, and very soon they will have, a much easier trading relationship between the 2 countries. And let me say, there is natural synergy between Nigeria and Kenya. What they have, we don't have. What we have, they don't have. Although what they have in abundance, we've also started to discover. And there's a lot of shared experiences. And personally, I cannot for the life of me understand why it's taken so long for such great nations in Africa to begin conversation with each other.
Well, perhaps it would have something to do with what I'm going to ask you next, the question of moving across borders. Africa tends to throw up all sorts of visa barriers left, right and centre. And we have had, for example, a dispute between Kenya and South Africa with respect to visa regulations. To what extent is the Chamber engaging government to ensure that we have a more open visa policy, especially with regard to trade and investment?
Okay, you are aware that South Africa, in Kenya recently, in retaliation to South Africa's decision to make a visa regulation quite difficult for Kenyans, retaliated with similar measures. And I was glad to note that the South African president has actually appealed to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Kenya to put the new regulations that were imposed by Kenya in abeyance, pending the conversation between bilateral conversation between the two countries. But let me say that mobility of labor is an integral part of economic development. You cannot develop if you don't have mobility of labor and mobility of capital. And, I'm confident that we are heading in the right direction. Our President Kenyatta in Kampala 2 days ago stated that there is complete mobility now, 100% mobility between Kenya and Rwanda. Uganda is going through a national ID card regime, after which they will be able to move into the same treaty. But the protocols that govern the East African community and the customs union does provide for free mobility of labor.
All right. So unfortunately, I'll have to jump in there and just end this very briefly. But thank you for your time this evening. We've been talking to Kiprono Kitonyi. He's the chairman of the Kenya National Chamber of Commerce and Industry right here in studio. Now, still within the larger East African region, after more than 2 decades of turmoil, Somalia is slowly recovering, and that reconstruction effort is creating new openings, in effect, to quite a few entrepreneurs. Tonight, let's introduce you to one, Mahmoud Mohammed Sheikh. He's a man who set up a laundry service that deliberately targets those who require high-end cleaning services previously not available at all in Mogadishu.
My name is Mohammed Mahmoud Sheikh. I'm originally Somalian. I was born in Italy, raised in Tanzania. I felt like I need to come back here and see what I can do here. So that's the time I came back here, looked at the town and thought like what business to do first. Because I had a lot of ideas, but the dry cleaning idea just popped inside. A normal person who's like, let's say a minister or an MP or a businessman or an NGO worker who wears a suit to work always had to take his suits to Nairobi, Addis or Djibouti for just dry cleaning it. This is our laundry place. This is a place where I do my laundry, like the shirts, the jeans, all the things that need machine wash. The challenge is first finding the location, and I all came to know that this Makal Mukarama road was the busiest road. Coming from the airport, going to the presidential palace, and every businessman, NGOs, all take this road. It was just really hard for a Somalian to believe like you're dry cleaning. It's like, no, he's using his hands to wash the clothes. So I had to take, to put so much effort on just marketing this business. And now things are going so well. Like my business runs from 8 morning until 6 in the evening. Sometimes I run until 9 in the evening. Right now I have customers who always come back like 3 times a week for bringing like 5 suits each time they come. Mogadishu is changing a lot, business is booming. People are now having the confidence that it's peace, So I'm telling my brothers and sisters, Somalians, or anybody, international, foreign people, come to Mogadishu, see for yourself, and I'm sure you can bring some new ideas to the country, because Mogadishu needs new ideas so far.
And with the laundry business in Mogadishu, that's it for this edition of Global Business. I'm Ramanyang in Nairobi. Thank you for watching.